All right, well, thank you for being here. This is the part 2 session of the Senior Job Search for Public Health and Global Health. And we're just going to get right into it. Today, we're going to be particularly focusing on effective networking via LinkedIn and GW Career Connect, conducting informational interviews, and how that ties into interpreting interview questions. So we'll be preparing you for your interview, some general interview questions as you start to hopefully hear back from the places to which you are applying. Okay, so networking via LinkedIn, we're really just, why is this blank? Excuse me. Oh. We really just want to focus on considering how you're connecting with certain people. So I'm going to pull up my LinkedIn page, and Lucy, can you let me know, can you see this here on my screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, the LinkedIn, great. So if you're not on LinkedIn, I highly recommend that you join. You don't have to worry about perfecting your page at this point, but you do want to be on it, and I'll explain why in a moment. However, when you go to LinkedIn in the search bar, you'll type in the George Washington University, and you'll come to our page here. When you're on the George Washington University, you'll want to select alumni, which you can see here. And as an example, I can type in global health. And now we're down from 70,000 to 12,000. If you want to search for people just in the DC area, you're welcome to do that, or in other areas, maybe New York, even internationally, of course. But then you're able to look for people that might be of interest. So I'm going to choose the first person mentioned. And let's say that I'm looking at her page and I'm very interested in what she's done. And I am curious to know when and why she chose to go to graduate school, perhaps, and how that was beneficial to her. Go right ahead and connect. And you can add a note. And here's your opportunity to say that you are a graduating senior, considering the global health field broadly and wondering if she has 20 to 30 minutes for an informational interview. And I can't stress enough the importance of using the term informational interview so that the professional knows that you are taking this meeting seriously and that you will come prepared with certain questions to ask, and you will have a higher or stronger return on investment in doing so. So I do recommend that you take time to search through the many alums that are on LinkedIn and feel free to connect with them. Another way to network, though, is to look up particular organizations of interest. So for instance, if I go back to the main page and I type in, I wanted to look up Kaiser Family Foundation. Let's say you're interested in doing some research, qualitative or quantitative research regarding determinants of health or health disparities. You can go to the organizations page, and then you can go here to where it says how many employees are listed. So we have 213 employees. I'm going to select that. And then I'm going to go to the All Filters tab up in the right-hand corner. Scroll down until you get to schools. Sometimes it will show the George Washington University. Sometimes it won't, but you just need to add it and then select it. And now you can see that there are 5 people working at Kaiser Family Foundation, somehow related to GW, having graduated from there, or maybe they're a current student doing an internship. So here's a great way to filter your search and to start to intentionally seek out those who are connected to GW, just so that you have something in common and a connection. Are there any questions on this?
No, not yet.
Okay. Thank you. Great. So I'm going to go through these slides then, because I just showed you in real time. So really just to review from yesterday a little bit more, when we're talking about LinkedIn networking, you do want to always ask whomever you're speaking with if they would refer you to someone else to speak with. That way you're naturally growing your networking tree. So let's say you talk to a professional, you've received some good information from them. At the end, when you thank them, you can just say, I've appreciated this time, and is there anyone else you recommend I speak with? And could you connect me, or could I have their contact information? That way you're not kind of throwing these, these shots in the dark, if you will, but people are actually referring you. Okay. Making sure that when you are reaching out, obviously attention to detail, making sure you don't have spelling errors, etc. It just helps with those first impressions. All right, so then we have GW Career Connect, and I'm not going to pull it up live, but I just want to make sure you know about this because every senior is automatically put into GW Career Connect. So you can just join, you're automatically in. And this is a GW specific LinkedIn, if you will. So these are alums who have agreed that they are willing and want to speak with current students and recent grads to help them with their perhaps resume preparation, their networking skills, their elevator pitch, or to do informational interviews, or maybe even to help with referrals. It depends on what they've listed as the area that they want to help you. And so you can see here that when you go into GW Career Connect, there will be different sectors or industry areas that you can choose from. You don't have to just choose one. I would recommend casting a larger net, if you will, because you might find employment in an area that you didn't originally think of. But this is just a networking opportunity. You can choose different sectors. And then same as LinkedIn, you're going to have particular people pop up and you can reach out to them. The good thing about GW Career Connect is when you do seek to connect, you'll be able to see, for instance, this alum is saying the things that she's here to help with, as you can see in the green, is applying for grad and professional school. So she would be most appropriate to reach out to if you're considering doing that. And then when you message her, as you can see in this blue tab, you actually have options to have it be pre-populated for you. So if you are looking to do career exploration, you can select career exploration and there'll be verbiage that pops up in this box. Or if you're looking to expand your network or just simply reconnect, you can choose any of those three pre-populated, pre-written notes, or you can write your own. So that's just something to consider, and knowing that you have people who are truly willing to speak with you. So let's move right along then to informational interviews and get into the meat of our conversation today, which will then lead us to actual interviews. So I'm curious to know, when you are considering doing an informational interview, whether you've done one specifically or not, the questions you want to ask yourself is, what is your role in the conversation? What do you want to take away? And what do you want to leave behind? So Lucy, would you mind sharing what you think you would want to, what your role is and what you want to take away?
I guess it depends on the conversation, but I guess like you just want to like ask any questions that you have about like where they work, their career path, and like get an understanding of what they do and why.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And ideally you'll have done some of that research from their page and from looking at the website of their company. So you can ask perhaps some targeted questions. Like, I noticed there's professional development offered in this company. How do you see that as being beneficial? Or if you're a recent grad, maybe it's something like, how did you get your foot in the door of this industry? And what were the skills necessary to do so? So you're really asking questions that hopefully you'll leave with some tangible skills and results, if you will, that you can start to take with you. So first of all, showing curiosity, right? You want to treat it formally. This is like an interview, come with prepared questions. It's not like an interview in the sense that once you ask one question, people like to talk about themselves so much, you might have to, interject and actually get in a second question. People can just take it and run with it. But ideally, it's going to be, tell me a bit about yourself. How did you get involved in the field? Can you tell me about a day in the life? What do you do in your job day to day? And then what are some skills you believe I should be cultivating? And how do you recommend I do so? And then in your mind, what do you want to be leaving behind then at the end of this conversation?
Just like a good impression and a connection.
Yeah, exactly. Just a good impression. So yesterday we spoke about professional brand, making sure that you can actually articulate and leave with them that initial reaction, image, or feeling. Like, this person's taking his or her professional development seriously. They're passionate about what we do here. Those are all just good impressions. Okay. So let's move into interviewing then. So as you start to send your application out and network and go to career fairs, etc., ideally you will be asked to do some sort of initial interview. And whether that's just a phone interview that leads to a second interview, that will depend on the process in which the company is using to actually hire people. But when you go through the interview process, there really are three areas that I would like to highlight, three types of interview questions. So you have your traditional questions, right? Tell me about yourself. And I used healthcare as an example. You know, why do you want to work in healthcare? Could you describe one strength or one weakness as it relates to your candidacy? These are traditional questions, things you want to be prepared to speak to, and they're just very kind of open-ended in the sense that you can take the answers in whatever direction you want. The tricky ones, they all can be tricky if you don't prepare, but the ones that I think sometimes people are more nervous about are the behavioral questions, because that requires telling a story. And so here, you're asked to tell a time. Tell me about a time when you demonstrated particular types of behavior. So tell me about a time in which you demonstrated leadership. Tell me about a time in which you had to take initiative, and what did that look like? Could you tell me about a time in which you failed, and how did you handle this? So that's asking you about your behavior. And for those questions, we're following the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. And we'll go over that in a moment. And then lastly, you might be asked industry or skill specific questions. So maybe it's walk me through how you write a policy brief, if that's something that would be needed in the job. Or, you know, if it's advocacy related, within community education, what are some of the barriers one might face? They want to see, what do you know about this industry at large? So traditional, behavioral, and industry or skill specific. Those are the three buckets that I'm focusing on today. Of course, there are several other types of interview questions, but I do believe that these are the ones that can best prepare you for really any general interview. Okay, so as I just said, in the behavioral questions, we have the STAR method. So if you're telling a story, you don't actually have to preface it by saying, well, the situation was and the task was, but this is for you to use in your own mind to keep you on track. So a time in which you took initiative, perhaps it's when I was working at my part-time job at a coffee shop and there was an extensive line of patrons waiting to put in their order. And so I took the initiative to ABC, and then it ended up resulting in, you know, a quicker processing of payment and happier customers and XYZ. So that would be the situation, task, action, result. An example that might be more specific is, tell me about a time when you had difficulty working in a group. And as you can see, this is in my biology class, I was assigned a group project with 6 other students, but one student was extremely reluctant to contribute to the presentation, and she wasn't comfortable with oral presentations. So the student and I collaborated and communicated to create tasks that he felt comfortable with. After this, the group worked more efficiently and he was able to make meaningful contributions to the team. So that's very standard. Obviously, you could add more information in there, particularly in the action and the result. What do you mean the student and you collaborated and communicated? How did you collaborate? Did you meet after class? How did you communicate, an email, etc.? But that's the standard framework. Sometimes I'm asked how often or how long should my answers be in an interview? So much of an interview is intuitive and it's about chemistry and connection, but you also have interviewers who sometimes will purposefully be reserved and removed and almost have a blank face where they don't want to show much emotion. So you want to be prepared for that mentally, because you don't want their lack of response to make you feel as though you have not provided an adequate answer, which is why you need to know yourself and believe that you are bringing the best you can to the table. As long as you have assurance in your answers, then you don't need to rely on others. You also could just get a weak interviewer. And sometimes you almost have to manage up in the interview. Make sure that you are showing up with your best answers, and then you let the chips fall where they may. So I would say to you though, in general, as a general rule, a minute to a minute and a half is significant and is sufficient amount of time to be speaking for an answer. You'd be surprised. Try answering a question, and within 20 seconds, you'll start to think, am I talking too much? So you want to be able to become comfortable speaking for a minute if needed. You don't have to absolutely time yourself, but that's just some helpful information. All right, so here's the fun part, and the part that I'll be asking for some input. Why am I being asked this interview question? So what if I were to ask you, tell me about yourself? All right, so that we call it a traditional question, but it's also traditionally stressful for people. Oh no, where do I begin? What do I start? What are some words that come to mind as to what I might be looking for when I ask you, tell me about yourself?
Maybe like your major, your interests, your like passion for the healthcare field.
Yeah, your motivation. Yep, your motivation, and that's kind of what you're encompassing in all of that, your interests, your passion. And ideally, they're asking you, tell me about yourself. So what are maybe a few, what has motivated you to study this? What are your interests? Maybe one or two examples of ways you've engaged to further develop your interest. But then ideally, you want to land the answer with, and why has it gotten you to this point? Or how has it gotten you to this point? So basically saying, I've studied public health. I was involved in XYZ student organization that really developed my skills and my interests. I made sure to shadow some people. And I believe that with my skills and my inquisitive nature, I'm really well suited for this type of work, which leads me here today. So notice how I'm ending it with, and this is why I'm in the seat. Very good. What about, tell me about a time when you were under pressure and how you dealt with this. I guess I want to ask, and this might seem somewhat straightforward, but it's good to highlight. Does the interviewer necessarily care what the situation was that caused you pressure? Or is it just how you dealt with it that matters?
I think just how you dealt with it.
Okay, so just how you dealt with it, yep. That could be true. And at the same time, what if you were going to give an example where there was a high volume of people and you were overwhelmed by all of the work, and this particular job is one where you wear many hats and it's a high volume of work. That might tell them that this is not a good fit for you. So making sure that you are mindful of the context and the content that you provide when asked that. But you are right, mostly it's showing your resilience. How do you handle and deal with pressure? So where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? This question for me personally always used to rub me the wrong way. And I just share that because I think sometimes it still rubs people the wrong way. And I caution you against being reactionary in an interview to the question. More often than not, I personally think it's a somewhat lazy question because especially for an entry-level position where it's like, okay, someone needs to get their feet wet first before they can really answer that question. However, if this is a company that has a great deal of growth and hierarchy and is, goal-oriented in that way, they might just want to hear, it's not just where do you want to be in 5 years, but the question's really asking, how is this job going to help you meet those goals in 5 years' time or 10 years' time? So it's asking you to identify those transferable skills that you might gain and contribute and how that would help you down the line. And then what interests you about this job? You just want to leverage the difference between what do you contribute versus what are you going to gain, right? If it's just about me, and what I'm going to get from this job, and this is why I'm interested, that's less of a selling point than being able to showcase that you are interested in growing and can you articulate how you would contribute to the job, right? So that you have particular skills that you want to further invest in this job. And then Lucy, have you been asked about the question, what are your weaknesses? Have you ever been asked that?
Yeah, I think I have.
How did you feel about that question?
I wasn't really expecting it because it was one of my like first interviews for one of my first internships.
Great.
Thank you.
What did you learn from that experience then? What were some takeaways?
I guess I learned after that you shouldn't say something too basic, like I'm a perfectionist or like I'm too much of a perfectionist or something like that. And that you should just show how you grew after you recognize that weakness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would say there's the opportunity, the more you know about a job, the more you might be able to pinpoint where there might be a weakness in terms of your own knowledge or skills. And you could recognize, well, a weakness of mine is that I haven't had a great deal of, let's say, oral communication skills. I haven't done a lot of presentations, and maybe that's something that's needed for the job. Now, you don't want to just say, I have no experience with that, but you could say something like, I think a weakness of mine is that I haven't yet been able to fully cultivate my oral presentation skills. However, I am taking a LinkedIn learning course on this, and I am practicing by giving small presentations with friends just to make sure that I become comfortable describing things in clear and concise ways. So you're mentioning a weakness while showing how you are overcoming it. Some interviewers won't even like that answer because then they'll say, no, I really want to know about one of your weaknesses, like you're not, as if they're pushing you to say, well, I'm not motivated or I don't have time management skills. But the reality is, what are they really looking for? So the reason I give that example is because if they're going to ask you about your weaknesses, it is up to you to jump through the hoop of this game called interviewing. It's like, okay, what do they want to know? And so perfectionism, yeah, that could be a bit too general. But if you can speak to how a particular attribute of yours, maybe it's perfectionism, but you're learning how to balance that with having many responsibilities. And so knowing that your job is to give your best effort and then not worry so much about the outcome. Like that would be something that you could say a bit more about perfectionism as sort of a weakness, but I think I'm rambling, so I'm going to stop talking. But basically what I'm saying is sometimes the question is a red flag in an interview, not always, but sometimes it can be. If the interviewer is not pleased because you're not somehow, confessing your greatest weakness, then they don't know what they're doing in asking the question, because it really is a sort of a ping pong game, if you will. They're going to hit the ball one way, you need to hit it back. And basically, I would just suggest to you, choose something that is honest enough to be something that you can constructively work on improving. But you don't want to list anything that's going to make them think, okay, well, then we can't hire them. Lucy, did that make any sense, seeing as I just talked a lot?
Yeah, it did.
Okay, thank you. Sometimes I need a little confirmation there. Let's see. And then what gets you up in the morning? That's sort of a vague question, but what is that maybe looking to ask?
Just what you're passionate about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what you're passionate about, what you're motivated about. And it doesn't even have to be a thing or only a thing. Like, well, what wakes me up in the morning is thinking about all the positive change I can make within public health. Well, great, that's good. But it also could be, what gets me up in the morning is relationship. I really look to connect with people, and I'm eager to do that in a role that will allow me to meet the needs of people. So notice I picked something that isn't like a philosophical thing. It's just something that I care about, a value of mine. Okay, let's see here. So I guess, Lucy, if I asked you, tell me about yourself, would you like to just share a thought or two with me about what you would say for that? If I were to ask you, tell me about yourself.
Sure. I guess I would start off by saying that I'm an international affairs major, but I started taking public health classes when I was a sophomore, and I realized that I was really interested in it. So I declared my minor in public health, and then I went outside of the classroom with a couple of professors to hear more about it and connected with some people in the global health field at United Way, where I was interning last summer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you made sure to connect with United Way. And maybe could you also add, what is it about global health that
Yeah,
spoke to you? Mm-hmm.
I guess I could say I just really wanted to contribute to meaningful work. And I guess I just realized that global health was very meaningful and that you could make a lot of positive change.
Yeah. And it also allows you an opportunity, I would suggest, to consider in what ways you see the intersection between international affairs or development and public health, global public health. So I'm not saying you have to list things specifically, but it's very complementary. Your major and your minor are complementary. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So being able to articulate how you see that as being complementary, I think that's of benefit. Because the steps that you took, although it's nice to hear about it, you know, you had a major, then you chose a minor, you talked with some professors, and it led you to United Way. You'll note that that is, it's very detail oriented as to your path, but I would suggest to you that it's limited in me understanding your values. Do you see the difference? You told me structure versus lack of values. So I'm just offering you some things to consider, which would be, where do you see the intersection between your interests? And, you know, maybe identify specifically in what ways you think public health is particularly meaningful. Oftentimes I hear students, particularly in Elliott, who have majors and minors that are complementary, talk about, and even students who might study, who might be considering more allied health, you know, clinical, the relationship between the micro and the macro perspectives of things. And so I don't know if that speaks to anything that you've studied, but in what ways can you study things on a macro level versus a micro level, and maybe how that interested you? So just things to consider. You did a great job with your answer, but those are things to consider. Do you have any follow-up questions for me with regard to that?
No.
Okay. And then, let's see. I'll just ask you one more question, then I'll leave you be, Lucy. Where do you see yourself in 5 and 10 years? What are some futuristic values of yours in terms of how you might want to contribute to meaningful change, as you just identified? What are some of those futuristic values that you think you could identify in the here and now, if you were to share some of those with me?
That's a super tricky question.
Isn't it? Yeah.
I guess maybe finding like my niche within global health, like maybe finding some specific project that I'm really passionate about. Like maybe it's like neglected tropical diseases or something like really specific. And then like sort of following that career path, and then also like looking to maybe get my master's and grow like within the company.
So I love this, Lucy. Thank you so much, because that is exactly the authenticity that I would want to hear in an interviewee. Because I think what happens is we ask this question and people assume that we need to receive a very concrete answer. And what it tells me is, if you were to say, well, you know, at this point, my 5-year plan is to simply be developing and growing in terms of my knowledge of the field and the niche areas within it that will interest me. Once I can identify that more clearly, I think I'll have more purpose behind my decision to pursue graduate work and to continue cultivating my my professional competencies as a you know, within the master's degree. So do you see how your answer was really quite perfect? It's just that you want to own your story. That's not that, to me, that doesn't lack in its strength, you know. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good thing. It's reality.
Yeah.
You can't know 5 or 10 years if you don't have the niche area yet, and you can't identify the niche area if you haven't been exposed to projects and various experiences in the work environment. And so, but the fact that you can articulate that shows that you have maturity of thought, and that is a type of maturity of thought and self-actualization that an employer would want to hear. So that's a good thing. What are some general questions you have, for, if you have any, that you might have for me regarding the interview process, things that I've just discussed with you, or anything else that maybe wasn't addressed today? Because of course, yesterday we talked about professional brand.
I guess when an interviewer at the end of the interview asks you what questions you have for them, are there any questions that are like maybe too basic that you should avoid that like maybe everyone is asking? Or there's some questions that are really, really good?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would encourage your questions to be informed by your research. So questions that I would think are considered weak are ones that you could find on your own by doing research on the internet. So looking up the company, could you tell me more about your company's mission? Well, you could read that online. Or, but perhaps, let's say you read that in their HR page or something, that they value professional development for their employees. So you can say that you appreciated seeing that, and you were wondering if they could speak to how this is implemented. What types of professional development do they advocate for, and what are the options for someone like yourself coming in? Another question that can be helpful, sometimes people just throw in as if they don't care, but they just ask, what makes a successful candidate? But that's kind of generic. So instead, if there was good chemistry between you and the interviewer, and you felt comfortable asking, you could say, based on what I've shared about myself throughout this interview and the skills and competencies that I've addressed, could you speak to how you think I meet a successful candidate that you'd be looking for? Like, how do my skills speak to how you define a successful candidate? So you're basically saying, am I a good fit? But instead of just saying what makes a successful candidate, you compare it to, based on what I've shared with you over this past half hour or hour, I'm curious to know if you see any correlation between how you define a successful candidate and what you've heard from me today. And it kind of allows for an exchange, of ideas and thoughts about your candidacy. It's also helpful before the very end, when it's time for you to ask questions, you could also say, I want to make sure that I offer you an opportunity to ask anything if I haven't addressed something enough to your liking, or if there's anything that you feel is missing in what I have shared so far, please feel free to, I want to make sure I can answer any of your questions. So you're giving them an opportunity to think outside the box with anything that maybe you haven't yet addressed. And then also, I think it's important to ask questions about workplace culture. So hopefully they're telling you a bit about their department and what motivates them and what they're looking for. But you could also say, could you define for me or describe for me your workplace culture day to day? What is the interactions among colleagues? And if you value inclusion and, diversity and equity, you could ask them to define or describe in what ways does your company uplift and celebrate the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the office, because those are values that are important to me. And I would want to work in a place where, that is upheld within the office culture. So those are just some examples. Does that help you at all, Lucy?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions?
Could you talk a little bit about like Zoom interview etiquette versus like in person?
Mm-hmm. Great question. Well, certainly I would, in any interview, I would make sure that it is your prerogative to make sure that you know who was present in the interview ahead of time. So if they say, great, here's the date, and we're going to be interviewing, here's the Zoom link, you can say, thank you so much. And is it possible for me to know the names and titles of those who will be present in the interview? Because then you can do your research on LinkedIn, and you are also aware of the fact, is there going to be one person or 4 people, interviewing you? Secondly, you do want to make sure that you check the link, like make sure you're on and that early, and that your audio and visual are working. So make sure that that is set up and ready to go prior to the interview. And that you have your phone near you in case maybe the video isn't working, and you can call with whatever the code or number is. As for anything else regarding Zoom, excuse me, I'm just taking a sip of water. I would want to suggest to you that you just make sure that you're in a place that has decent lighting. So either you're by a window, or you make sure your lights are on, and that there's no, shadow being casted where I can't see your face. So good visualization. And then lastly, with regard to Zoom etiquette, you might want to check with a friend, do Zoom ahead of time to make sure that you are giving good eye contact into the camera. So it does take practice when you see multiple faces on the screen to actually look at the light on your computer rather than at the faces. Some people forget that you can change the layout on Zoom so that if people are tiny boxes at the bottom, make sure that you just change the layout so that you can see bigger faces side by side or something. Because you don't want to be looking down at people. You want to be more naturally facing, your eye contact is forward. But sometimes when I've practiced with students, I'll ask them to lower if it's a laptop, lower their laptop or elevate it so that they can have better eye contact. But basically just making sure you're looking straight ahead. And then the last thing I would say about Zoom etiquette, and I suppose etiquette isn't quite the right word, but it's quite different to use hands to provide gestures when you are at a round table and everyone's talking. But when you start using your hands a lot when you speak and you have this small square on the screen, it can be quite distracting. So I would encourage you to be mindful of keeping your hands down, like hold your hands down, don't sit on them or anything that looks awkward, but just be mindful that you're not always using your hands in front of your face to make gestures as you speak, because that is actually distracting. Other than that, I would say that you're golden. You don't have to have a particular background behind you or anything like that. I would just make sure that you don't have like a trash can behind you or, a messy bed or something. Just make sure it's, tidy. That's about it. Do you have particular concerns about Zoom that I didn't address?
No, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't something that I was like missing about it.
Yeah,
like,
I don't
not thinking of.
Yeah, no, I would say not. Just make sure that audio and video is working well beforehand, and that the link works. But we know that sometimes these things just, digital things can sometimes not work, and that's okay. Just like I said, make sure you have a number to call them if there was a technical issue. Other questions about virtual interviewing, anything like that? We do have a system called Interview Stream. It's available through Handshake. Just type in resources, Interview Stream, and you can actually record yourself. You can choose questions and record yourself and watch yourself back to see how your interviewing skills are. Just the process is kind of awkward. So I think people's responses seem awkward when they practice, but it can be helpful just in terms of practicing that eye contact and And yes, and try your best to watch your tone, right? Because again, in person, you have body language, and that can be beneficial. If you're only seeing someone from their torso up, really, and even less, like your neck up, if you're not mindful of keeping sort of, for lack of a better phrase, an upbeat tone to your voice, it can be more obvious that it's sort of a drain to listen to someone when their voice is constantly maybe monotone. So do be mindful of your voice as well. I say that to anyone who, watches this. So we do have a list of resources here that I'll be sending this out to attendees. So we have an interview tips and guide, the link to interview stream, 7 common questions making a good impression in virtual interviewing. So to your questions, Lucy, you'll have lots of resources here. And then how to make sure that your online profile and LinkedIn pages are strong and accurate in terms of your professional brand. And so basically interviewing resources. But I do recommend anytime you want to set up a one-on-one appointment, and I'm available for mock interviews. We can practice behavioral and traditional questions. And when you do get an interview, certainly whenever you want, schedule an appointment. And, again, we can practice based on the job description. So one-on-one appointments are here. Oh, hi, Malika. I'm sorry. Lucy, I kept calling on you. I didn't realize there was another person present. I apologize. But yes, Malika, good to see you.
No worries. Thank you. I just had a quick question about I'm a senior, so I'm graduating, and but will we still have access to these resources and be able to set up appointments with you even after we graduate?
Absolutely. Yes, you do not lose privileges. So even after you graduate, you have access to Handshake, and you can schedule an appointment just like you would now through the appointment tab, and any of the resources on Handshake will still be available to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you for asking. That's important for you to know. Any other questions? Well, just know that I'm here and the other coaches are here as you need us, as you want to meet with us. And you don't need to wait until you know exactly what the interview is to start preparing yourself for the interview process. So I would encourage you to be thinking, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. Just to be thinking futuristically about that. And get ahead of the game, if you will. Okay, so I will be sure to email this presentation to you. And if anyone has any other questions, I'll stay on just for a few minutes. And I thank you for being present. And I hope this was beneficial in some regard. Hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.